If you like to talk about combat sports and you want to join the discussion, click the subscribe button below and the bell notification icon next to it and join Knucklehead Nation. What's going on, Knuckleheads? Welcome to another episode of the FightersRep video podcast. As usual, I'm your host, the FightersRep, and man, today we've got some exciting news in the combat sports world, or should I say intriguing news. Basically, Eddie Hearn is now back in the fight between Francis Ngannou and Dillian Whyte. So some pretty intriguing boxing news. And the reason I put boxing news in parentheses is because it looks like Francis Ngannou would be more interested in stepping into a ring then I think Dillian Whyte would probably be interested in stepping into a cage. And I say that because Ngannou has historically wanted to box, and he confirmed that on the Mike Tyson Hot Boxing podcast, where once again he indicated to the masses that he's interested in boxing. And that, you know, that's a dream of his, to which Iron Mike Tyson countered, hey, you spoke it into existence and now it's coming towards you. Because, you know, as we've been hearing in the rumor mill for quite some time, Dana White and Zuffa, and I'm not sure if, you know, it's the Fertitta brothers that used to own the UFC or whatever, but Dana White, perhaps the new UFC owners, somebody there wants to get in to boxing, and it could be that, you know, boxing is going to make its way to the UFC, or the UFC is going to make its way to boxing, rather. And that would be an exciting prospect. I would be interested to see what the UFC could do to boxing. A lot of people complain that boxers don't get paid the same amount of money, or rather MMA fighters don't get paid about the same amount of money, and that, you know, the UFC kind of shortchanges athletes. But I think if you look at the bare minimum that the, you know, typical guys make starting out, the UFC guys are actually doing pretty well compared to boxers that are starting out, you know, who sometimes start for nothing, who sometimes fight for nothing. But again, that would be comparing, you know, promotions to sports. We can't do that. I think we gotta, when we look at it in that context, we gotta look at it promoter versus promoter. So, you know, how does the UFC pay a guy starting out? How does Top Rank, for instance, pay a guy starting out? But that being said, the topic at hand, Francis Ngannou taking on Dillian Whyte. Eddie Hearn is saying that it's something that could happen as early as the end of this year. And we're all, you know, right now we're all shut down. We're going through this coronavirus. Nobody knows, you know, when this thing is going to lit up. Nobody knows when we're going to get back to normal life. So, you know, it is exciting to hear that they think that this is something that could happen before the end of the year. So let's see where this information came from. Basically, Eddie Hearn said, and I believe it was on an Instagram live chat, Hearn said that Ngannou was interested in taking on Dillian Whyte in the ring. And Hearn also stated that he's planning to the UFC kingpin, a.k.a. the boss, a.k.a. Uncle Dana White, about the potential, you know, cross-promotional bout, cross-combat sport bout between Dillian Whyte and the monster from the Cameroon, Francis Ngannou. But, I mean, again, you know, it looks like Ngannou wants this to happen in the ring. Eddie Hearn was quoted as saying that maybe me and Dana could put this night together where you've got a ring which also transforms into a cage between matchups. I think that's really, you know, that's really interesting. But at the same time, a ring that, you know, transitions into a cage between matchups, I don't know. I don't know how I feel about that, you guys. I don't know how I feel about that. I don't know how I feel about that. Because, I don't like hybrid promotions, if I'm being honest with you guys. I like to see, if you're going to do boxing, let's have a boxing event. If you're going to do MMA, let's do an MMA event. But this is what they're saying. And again, we've talked about this before on the channel. It's an intriguing matchup. I'd love to hear what you guys think about this matchup. And, I think it's a fight that would, bring a lot of fanfare. But, I don't know how much. I don't know how much because it's not like the best versus the best like we had, when Conor, who was, essentially one of the best, took on Floyd Mayweather, who is the best. It's, Dillian Whyte, who is an interim WBC title holder, taking on Francis Ngannou, who's, also a contender for the heavyweight title, not really a champion yet. So, I don't know how I feel about this fight, but before I continue with you guys, hit the subscribe button, the bell notification icon next to it. Join Knucklehead Nation. Help me continue to build a promotion. Every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 7 p.m. we do this, and we are doing it every Monday at 7 p.m. That's called the Keep It Clean podcast, and that's exclusively boxing, and that's with Manny Robles. That's Keep It Clean with Manny Robles. That's every Monday at 7 p.m., and you'll get me on Wednesdays and Fridays at 7 p.m. So let's see what's going on in the chat real quick before we get ahead of ourselves. Lost One is in here. He says, hey, man, hope you're well. Glad you're still grinding. Is Francis the guy from Mike Tyson's podcast? Sorry, not a UFC guy. Yes, Lost One. He was the big Cameroonian guy from the Mike Tyson Hot Boxing podcast. The one that was saying, that he's interested in getting into the boxing ring. And in fact, if you've been following his career, he's actually a guy that initially went into the gym, and he explained it on the podcast, on the Hot Boxing podcast. He explained it. He said that basically he started out his career wanting to be a boxer, and when he went in initially, or when he, went over to France and, went into a combat sports gym, I mean, that's what he wanted to do. He didn't really want to do the MMA thing, apparently. So, very cool, if you ask me, that, he might get his opportunity to finally put on a boxing event. But the only thing is, I gotta say, as far as fairness, I don't think it's a good fight for him. I'll explain to you guys why in a minute. I love Francis, George, but why would this fight make sense for Francis? Why does a name only hardcores know right now? I agree with that, and that's a great point. And that's part of the reason I don't like this fight. As we, read more through your comments, I'll explain to you guys why I also don't like this fight, but I want to see if any of you guys bring up the reasons. Lost One says, Whyte used to kickbox, so he might not be too bad in the octagon. That being said, I love Francis on the podcast. People like that make me an instant fan. Yeah, Whyte does have a kickboxing / Muay Thai background. We've actually had his brother Dean Whyte on here before who explained that to us. And, I think that's where Whyte's toughness comes from. But it looks like, forget the octagon. It looks like Francis Ngannou wants to do this in the boxing ring, which is pretty crazy, if you ask me. Lost One says, I'd love to see that fight. Two guys I like fighting. Win-win in my book. Imagine if Francis beats Whyte in his first boxing fight. That's a crazy first scalp. How good is Francis in the UFC? What's his skill set? Lost One, he's mostly a boxer. And does he have a chance to win? Yes, he has a puncher's chance to win. But I think, having been an MMA fighter for so long, he's not going to be used to the structure of a boxing bout where you've got 12 rounds, 3-minute rounds. Maybe if they made it like a 10-rounder, he'd have a better chance. Maybe that's something they could straighten out in negotiations. But that's my other reason for not liking this fight is, besides the fact that Whyte isn't a massive name, he's a pretty big name in the UK, but outside the UK, only, pretty hardcore boxing fans know about him, especially here in the United States. Besides that, he's not an easy fight. I mean, he's the interim WBC titleist. He's been number one WBC contender since 2017. He's a guy who goes in there and bangs people the fuck out. I mean, he's a killer. So, he's not the guy. He's not the guy that you want to have your first fight against. He's very, very comfortable in there. He's beating Olympians like Oscar Rivas. He's beating guys that have been boxing their entire life, like, Joseph Parker and Oscar Rivas. He's beaten the likes, of Derek Chisora. He knocked him out in their last fight. Again, Joseph Parker, former heavyweight titleist, he beat him. His only loss is to Anthony Joshua, and as we know, I mean, he hurt Joshua in that fight. He had Joshua reeling at one point in that fight. Of course, Joshua eventually took over, but this is a Dillian Whyte that's greatly improved over that version of Dillian Whyte that fought Anthony Joshua on that night, and I think it's a terrible, terrible matchup for Francis Ngannou for his first ever boxing match, despite the fact that Francis Ngannou would likely hold all the physical advantages over Dillian Whyte. And I mean height, reach, athleticism, maybe, power. But Dillian Whyte has big power too, especially in that left hook. He's a boxer with head movement. He's not going to pull a Jairzinho where, he pulls back slightly and gets KO'd. He knows what he's doing in there. He's fought technical guys like Rivas and Parker. He's fought brawlers like Chisora. He's fought, he's been fighting, competing and boxing at the highest level for a very long time. And again, like I said, he's the number one contender in the WBC. Should be mandatory, even though the WBC is kind of being flaky with that term with regards to Whyte. But basically, in my opinion, he's been the mandatory challenger to the WBC championship since 2017. And Deontay Wilder basically avoided him for something like 900 plus days. So, no, bad fight for Francis Ngannou. Exciting fight for, combat sports fans. Of course, exciting fight for Eddie Hearn, who's probably looking to put a tourniquet on the bleeding out that DAZN is doing right now. They are hemorrhaging, and, they're looking for cash infusions. And what better way to do a cross-promotional bout with the UFC? And as far as his skill set goes, I mean, Francis is a stand-up guy. He throws hands. He's not really a wrestler, so he's like a boxer in the octagon. But I think it's a different story when you fight an actual boxer who's got something like 30 fights, pro fights under his belt, and has been fighting at the top level for years now. The guy who just lost to Fury could be built up as a huge boxing match, but he would look like a boxing magician against Francis. Are you talking about Wilder? Francis is a KO puncher. Wild. Some of the best visual KOs, but lacks any technical skills. He relies on his power like Wilder to erase his mistake. I don't think he's that horrible technically. I just feel like he's, going in there against a Dillian Whyte, a guy who's been doing this for years. A guy who's been doing this for years, man. That's a mistake. That's a mistake, a very high-level mistake. A very high-level mistake to make. And what's he going to get out of it? Like Marco, Fight Life Nation said in the chat, I mean, what's he going to get out of this? Is he going to pull in a ton of boxing fans? I mean, maybe if he wants to jumpstart his boxing career, it's something to do, but very dangerous fight, high risk, high reward. High reward in the sense that, if he wants to go into boxing full-time, it's a massive win. But the likelihood of him obtaining that high reward, I think, is low. So it's a scary fight. Lost One says, I don't like hybrid, but this is a good one. Francis used to train boxing, and Dillian used to train kickboxing. Way better fight than Conor and Floyd. I think it would be a good fight, but I thought Conor and Floyd was a close fight considering
Floyd is one of the best, if not the best to ever do it, in my opinion, the best to ever do it in boxing. And Conor, is a guy who didn't have a single boxing match in his life. I thought that was a really competitive fight, considering those circumstances. Fight Life Nation says YouTube is fight against Alistair Overeem. Francis isn't the technical striker, even Conor is. His shots are wild. Well, yeah, Conor is definitely much more technical than a Francis Ngannou. Lost One says, you had Dean Whyte on the podcast. Can you do me a favor? Tell me how far back the podcast was. I need that one. Yeah, just, go on the channel. It was probably like a couple weeks ago. Go on the channel. Just search Dean Whyte, and it should pop right up. Fight Life Nation says, the money for the top guys is so good that UFC fighters who are at the top desire. It's like you said, George, for the average fighter, UFC has a great pay structure. But DC just said he only made $3 million apiece for his John Jones fight. DC's one of the best in the sport, only pulled $3 million for his big fights. $3 million ain't that bad, man. $3 million ain't that bad. Muay Thai 23 says Wilder gassed himself out with the costume on the way to the ring. Got his drink spiked by Fury's crew, and his own eardrum was paid by Tyson's father to explode for the fight. Muay Thai 23, how ridiculous of you. You should have known that it wasn't even a perforated eardrum, brother. Perhaps everything else you're saying is true, but the eardrum was not perforated, although he was bleeding out of his ear. Lost One says, Whyte is one of my favorite fighters right now. That's for sure. Top 3. If they do it in the ring, I don't see Francis winning. I think he should start with someone like Martin. I think he should start with someone at his level. A guy with, 1 or 2 boxing fights. That's the way I feel about it. I would bet Danny Garcia was pulling more than that while he was an Alphabet title holder. Maybe. Lost One says, even if he loses, I'll still follow him. That's balls. I agree, and I love that attitude, Lost One. I love that attitude. I wish more of us would espouse that attitude that, win or lose, you got to respect the guy. You got to respect these fighters for stepping in there. MMA fighters will never do well in one-off bouts with good boxers. Good boxers have boxed for 10, 20 years since they were kids. Muscle memory and boxing IQ isn't learned in 1 year or even 2. And, there are skills that transition over from MMA, especially when you're a guy like, Conor or Francis Ngannou that spends the majority of his time standing up and throwing hands. But we're talking about, it's like a cricket player going into Major League Baseball and expecting to hit as many home runs as, Barry Bonds hit when he was the man. You know what I mean? It's just not, it's not a smart way to do things. I don't think it's a smart fight. I would much rather see, him take on a guy that's more his level. A fair fight. I don't think Dillian Whyte, could he win? Potentially, yes. He's such a big puncher, right? He's such a monstrous puncher. He's such an overwhelming, imposing figure. He could win, but Dillian Whyte is not the guy. That is not the guy. That's the can man. He wants to fight everybody. You know what I mean? He doesn't back down from anyone. He's going to stand in Francis Ngannou's face. I think he's going to wear him out within 5 or 6 rounds, and I think he puts him away in the second half of the fight. Dillian Whyte is not the guy to fuck with. You could do this kind of fight with a more timid heavyweight, yes, but Dillian Whyte has 0%, timidity, if that's even the word. The guy's not afraid of anything or anyone. So that's what I've got to say about that. Guys, if you haven't already, get your FightersRep shirt and the link below. Help me, build the channel. We've got a new knucklehead shirt, with a pretty, I think, clever definition of what a knucklehead is. If you subscribe, hit the bell notification icon below. You do become a part of Knucklehead Nation. But if you want to make it official, get you a shirt in the link below, guys. But anyway, guys, that's pretty much all I have for you today. I got a bit of a headache, so I'm going to sign off a bit early. But we will see you guys on Friday. And until next time, keep it clean, knuckleheads. I'm out.